Thank you. Thank you all.
Walaikum Assalam.
Furkan bhai, assalamu alaikum.
Assalamualaikum.
ভাই আরম্ভ করেন
প্লিজ স্যার প্লিজ
হারুন ভাই আরম্ভ করেন
করিম, শুরু করব।
স্যার শুরু করেন স্যার
I welcome everybody to our today's lovely lecture to be delivered by Professor Emeritus Amr Abdalla. He's widely known to us, and he's a scholar of very high profile and international standing and stature. It is a great pleasure and privilege for us, and we feel so proud that in spite of his busy schedule, he gave time, he gave his consent to deliver lecture today, and he is with us. I hope you will enjoy his deliberations. I now request our Secretary, Professor Dr. Abdul Karim, to read out from the scheduled programs, and also he will also make a brief introduction of our learned speaker of the day, Professor Dr. Abdul Karim.
Thank you, sir, Professor.
And I would like to appreciate and thank the founder of the trust fund, especially Shimin or Rimi and Ripa Apad. They are here, and they are the how to express that they are the three sisters, and three lovely sisters of our great leader, late Shoaib Tajuddin Ahmad. And Asiatic Society, we appreciate your contribution, and you have come up and established this trust fund here. That was a very good decision, because we can recollect and have some deliberation about the life, thought, and philosophy of our great leader, Shoaib Tajuddin Ahmad, on this occasion. So you are also with us today, and we appreciate and thank you too. Thank you. Karim, now you proceed.
Okay, thank you, Professor Dr. Harun Rashid, sir. Good evening. Tajuddin Ahmad Memorial Trust Fund Lecture 2020. Honorable Chairperson of the Tajuddin Ahmad Memorial Trust Fund, Professor Harun Rashid. Our guest speaker, Professor Amr Abdalla, founder of the Trust Fund, Ms. Sharmin Ahmed, President of the Asiatic Society of Bangladesh, and also the nominee of the Trust Fund, Professor Mahfuza Khanum, and their family members, members of the Trust Management Committee, distinguished fellows, honorable council members, and members of the society and guests. I, on behalf of the society and the Trust Fund, welcome you to the Tajuddin Ahmad Memorial Trust Fund Lecture 2020. Ladies and gentlemen, Mrs. Sharmin Ahmed, daughter of the late Tajuddin Ahmad, founded the Tajuddin Ahmad Memorial Trust Fund at the Asiatic Society of Bangladesh on 30th June 2013. The Trust Fund was established at the society with a view to organizing lectures by learned scholars on life and works of Tajuddin Ahmad, such as Tajuddin Ahmad as an individual, his socio-political economic vision, and his contribution to the war of liberation of Bangladesh, and history, culture, economy, and politics of Bangladesh. So far, 4 lectures have been delivered under the auspices of the Trust Fund. Now I would like to say a few words about Tajuddin Ahmad. Tajuddin Ahmad was a lawyer, politician, and the first Prime Minister of Bangladesh. Tajuddin Ahmad was born on 23rd July 1925 at village Dardaria in Kapashia Thana of Ghazipur district. His father was Maulavi Muhammad Yasin Khan and mother Mehrun Nesa Khanum. Tajuddin Ahmad passed matriculation in 1944 from St. George High School in Dhaka, intermediate in 1948, and BA honors in economics from Dhaka University in 1953. He stood 12th in the matriculation examination and 4th in the intermediate. He obtained law degree in 1964 and joined the Dhaka bar. Tajuddin Ahmad joined politics very early in his life. He presented the liberal section of the Muslim League since 1943 and took active part in the Pakistan movement. Tajuddin Ahmad was involved in all progressive movement of the country, including the language movement, the movement for economic emancipation of the people, and anti-communal movement. He resigned from the Muslim League in protest against its anti-people politics. He was one of the founder of the East Bengal Chhatra League, founded in 1948, and was amongst those who plotted the Awami Muslim League in 1949. He was a member of the All-Party Language Movement Committee and was arrested and detained during the movement. Tajuddin Ahmad was a founder member of the East Pakistan Jubilee and was a member of its executive committee from 1951 to 1953. He was the General Secretary of Dhaka District Unit of Awami Muslim League from 1952 to 1957. Tajuddin Ahmad was elected a member of the East Pakistan Provincial Assembly in 1954 as a nominee of the United Front, but was arrested under Section 92A in the same year. In 1955, he was elected Secretary for Cultural Affairs and Social Welfare of the Awami League. After the promulgation of martial law in the country in 1958, the Awami League was banned and Tajuddin Ahmad was detained for about a year. He participated in the democracy restoration movement organized by the National Democratic Front, headed by Hussein Sohaid Sohrawardi against military rule of Ayub Khan, and was imprisoned once again. He played a vital role in reviving the Awami League in 1964 and was elected organizing secretary of the party. He was arrested again in April 1964 and was released the following year. He actively participated in the election campaign of 1965 in favor of Fatima Jinnah, the presidential candidate of the combined opposition party. Tajuddin Ahmad was elected General Secretary of the Awami League in 1966. He joined the convention of the opposition parties held in Lahore as a member of the Awami League delegation 1966. During the 6-point movement, he was arrested under the Safety Act and was kept confined. The mass upsurge of 1969 compelled the government to release him. He participated in the roundtable conference at Rawalpindi convened by Ayub Khan to resolve the crisis between the government and the opposition parties as a member of the Awami League delegation. He was elected member of the National Assembly in 1970. The Awami League got overwhelming majority in the general election in 1970, but the rulers of the Pakistan denied the verdict of the people. Consequently, an unprecedented non-cooperation began in East Pakistan under the leadership of Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman. Tajuddin Ahmad was one of the organizers of the movement. Following the army crackdown and arrest of Bangabandhu on 25th March 1971, Tajuddin Ahmad left Dhaka for India with some of his colleagues. He became the Prime Minister of the Bangladesh government in exile at Mujibnagar that was formed under his able leadership and organized the War of Liberation. After the liberation of Bangladesh, Tajuddin Ahmad returned on 22nd December 1971 and became Prime Minister of the newly independent state. In the subsequent cabinet formed under Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, Tajuddin Ahmad was in charge of the Ministry of Finance and then of Finance and Planning. As a member of the Contribution Farming Committee, he played a vital role in forming the Constitution of Bangladesh. He was elected member of the Jatiyo Samsad in 1973 and was included in the cabinet. However, he resigned from the cabinet in 1974 as per direction of Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman. With the assassination of Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman on 15 August 1975, Tajuddin Ahmad was house arrested on the morning of that day. He was taken to the central jail on 22nd August 1975. He was brutally killed inside the Dhaka Central Jail on 3rd November, along with 3 other national leaders, namely Syed Nazrul Islam, A.S.M. Kamruzzaman, and M. Mansur Ali. Tajuddin Ahmad was a close associate with Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, the architect of Bangladesh, and played a significant role in the establishment of independent and sovereign Bangladesh. Himself an ardent follower of non-sectarian progressive politics, Tajuddin Ahmad played a significant role in the Bengali nationalist movement. He devoted himself to the service of distressed humanity throughout his life, having been connected with the Boy Scout movement. Now I would like to introduce our today's learned speaker, Dr. Amr Abdalla. Dr. Abdalla is a professor emeritus at the United Nations mandated University for Peace with main campus in Costa Rica. He is also the senior advisor on conflict resolution at the Washington-based organization Karama, Muslim Women Lawyers for Human Rights. From 2014 to 17, he was the senior advisor on policy analysis and research at the Institute for Peace and Security Studies of Addis Ababa University. In 2013 to 14, he was vice president of Salam Institute for Peace and Justice in Washington, D.C. From 2004 to 13, he was professor, dean, and vice rector at University of Peace. Prior to that, he was a senior fellow with the Peace Operations Policy Program, School of Public Policy at George Mason University, Virginia. He was also a professor of conflict analysis and resolution at the Graduate School of Islamic and Social Sciences in Leesburg, Virginia. Both his academic and professional careers are multidisciplinary. He obtained a law degree in Egypt in 1977, where he practiced law as a prosecuting attorney from 1978 to 1986. From 1981 to 86, he was a member of the public prosecutor team investigating the case of the assassination of President Sadat and numerous other terrorism cases. He then immigrated to the US, where he obtained a master's degree in sociology and a Ph.D. in conflict analysis and resolution from George Mason University. He has been teaching graduate classes in conflict analysis and resolution and has conducted training, research, and evaluation of conflict resolution and peace building programs in numerous countries in Africa, Asia, the Middle East, Europe, and the Americas. He has been an active figure in promoting interfaith dialogue and effective cross-cultural messages through workshops and community presentations in the United Nations and beyond. He pioneered the development of the first conflict resolution teaching and training manual for Muslim countries titled Say Peace. He also founded Project Light, Learning Islamic Guidance for Human Tolerance, a community peer-based anti-discrimination project funded by the National Conference for Community and Justice. In 2011, he established with Egyptian University of Peace graduates a program for community prevention of sectarian violence in Egypt. In 2018, he led the publication of the first Arabic glossary of terms in peace and conflict studies in cooperation with UNDP Iraq and the Iraqi Amal Association. Now I request Dr. Amr Abdalla to deliver his lecture, The Legacy of Tajuddin Ahmad, Peace and Conflict Studies Perspectives. Please, hope you will enjoy it. Thank you. Please, Professor Amr Abdalla, please.
Thank you so much, Professor Abdul Karim and Professor Rashid, and for this very generous introduction. I have to say that I go back a long time with Professor Harun al-Rashid, and it is really an honor to meet him again. I thank the Tajuddin Ahmad Memorial Trust Fund and the Asiatic Society of Bangladesh for organizing this event. And I have to again emphasize my appreciation to those organizations and to everyone involved in making this event happen. I will use a PowerPoint presentation that I prepared, and I will be following it. I hope that we can see it clearly. I will, of course, as you can see, that the title of this presentation is The Legacy of Tajuddin Ahmad, Peace and Conflict Studies Perspectives. When I say that this presentation will be about peace and conflict studies perspectives, it is because we in the field of peace and conflict find that we have developed a unique model or academic discipline that draws on different disciplines, from international relations to political science to economics to culture to gender to psychology, sociology. So I hope I'm not muted. So this field of peace and conflict studies has its own unique way of looking at areas related to conflict and conflict analysis. And that's what I am hoping that I will do today. In terms of our plan for the day, I will spend about 1 hour talking. And during this 1 hour, I will start by just briefly talking about my professional relationship with Bangladesh and Dhaka University. And then I also explain why I actually choose the Bangladesh-Pakistan conflict as a rich case study when I teach in the field of peace and conflict. And then I will introduce a framework for conflict analysis that I developed with several colleagues over the years. We call it CRC-PABIO, and I will be applying this to the case of that we are looking at today. I will be specific about the time scope of the analysis, and I really appreciate the introduction by Professor Abdul Karim of Tajuddin Ahmad, because it helps a lot to put a good perspective on the focus I will have in this analysis. I will then apply the framework of analysis to the Bangladesh-Pakistan conflict, and then I will put the larger focus on the role of Tajuddin Ahmad and the first government of Bangladesh in navigating what I call asymmetric conflict against a brutal enemy. And then we'll talk about what were the outcomes of this effort and lessons learned for managing asymmetric conflicts in general. In terms of my professional relationship with Bangladesh and Dhaka University, as a matter of fact, it goes back to 2004 when I came to Bangladesh to conduct a research on the madrasa system in Bangladesh. And it was really an eye-opener. And I see often that that research is cited by many scholars and academicians. And it was really a great effort, and I learned so much from it. Thanks to all the research assistants who worked with me at that time, who of course now 17 years after, they have PhDs and they are doing great work worldwide. And I'm very proud of all of them. This work really was, as I mentioned, eye-opener to understand some of the dynamics related to religious education in a Muslim country such as Bangladesh, and to realize that there are a lot of misconceptions and challenges and opportunities. And so that was my first professional encounter with Bangladesh, and it set the foundation for continuing work in the Bangladesh context. After that, through my work with University for Peace in Costa Rica, we had a program, we called it OPSAM, and that was like UPeace, Middle East, Asia, and Africa program, where we collaborated with different universities in South Asia, in Africa, and in the Middle East. One of the universities we collaborated with was Dhaka University, of course, because they have a program that has existed for some time on peace and conflict studies. And that's where, of course, my encounter with Professor Harun Rashid as the Vice Chancellor of the university at that time. And we collaborated very well in bringing junior faculty members to study at UPeace. I had the honor and opportunity to come and teach at Dhaka University at least once to the graduate students in the master's degree program. And from there, the relationship between University for Peace and Dhaka University and my own interaction with Dhaka University has been going on for the last 15 years. Has been really a great honor to work with all of you. And in addition to that, of course, as in the introduction, it was explained that I have been teaching and doing training and research in peace and conflict studies for more than 20 years now. I teach regularly courses about introduction or foundations of peace and conflict studies, whether at University for Peace or in many other places in the world. And in order for me to teach about peace and conflict, I always like to give a real life example. And I can tell you that I found that the Bangladesh-Pakistan conflict provides for me the richest type of material that I need to teach about peace and conflict. I say this because, as I'm going to explain in the analysis, almost every dynamic that you are interested in learning about in a conflict situation exists in the Bangladesh-Pakistan conflict, all the way from the role of religion, the role of culture, the role of gender, the role of the Cold War or international challenges, everything, and the dynamics of behavior, sources of conflict, who are the parties, everything I need to teach students about all dimensions of conflict and peace, I find it in the case of Bangladesh, Pakistan, especially the period of 1970 and 71 into early 72. And so it is so actually for me, it is really an honor now to come back to a group of scholars and interested people from Bangladesh and beyond to share how I apply the models of analysis to the Bangladesh-Pakistan conflict, which I have been doing in classrooms for the last 20 years or so. In order to do this, I will use a model of analysis that I developed, as I mentioned, which I call CRC-PABIO, and it's in front of you here. And in a nutshell, of course, I spent 2-3 days to explain in my classes how to use this model. But in a nutshell, I will say that when we think of any conflict in the world, no matter what level, from the very international and global to the community, to the organizational, to the interpersonal and family conflicts, in all those levels, there is always what we call conflict essential components that must exist in any conflict. And those are the ones that we see in the circle in the middle. Any conflict must have parties defined by the brown color. And the colors will be very important throughout this presentation to make it easy to continue to follow the analysis. Parties, we have to have parties of conflict, primary and secondary and so on. And then those parties usually engage in some type of a rational argument or disagreement about achieving certain interests and insisting on some positions. We call that the rational dimension of a conflict. Usually when the rational dimension gets stuck and the parties are unable to resolve their differences and achieve their interests mutually, and given many other factors, then they get engaged in what we call the psycho-behavioral dimension, where negative attitudes and perceptions and feelings start to form that result in certain behavior that is usually not pleasant and sometimes violent, in order for each side to try to achieve what they want. And then eventually there'll be some form of intervention that may take place, whether by the parties themselves, the direct parties, or by others, which will lead to some outcomes or significant stages that their conflict reaches. So in this model of CRC-PABIO, we are saying that any conflict in the world will include those essential components. However, understanding conflict by only looking at the essential components will provide to us an incomplete picture of what happens in a conflict. In order for us to have a complete picture of what's happening in the conflict, we need to appreciate the complexity of conflicts. And that's what I always advise my students and my colleagues, is do not try to look for a superficial analysis of conflict, but try to appreciate the complexity. The complexity comes from two major dimensions or influences. One comes from the relationship dimension, which includes, of course, the bond, meaning what is connecting the parties together, blood relation, religion, and we'll come to the specific example of Bangladesh about this. The power dynamics, of course, are very important, and what sources of power different parties have and how they use it. The patterns of behavior that they engage in, and also to what extent they have interdependence. All those elements of the relationship can influence any of the essential components here. So understanding how relationship elements influence essential components is critical for a complete picture of what's happening in the conflict. And then on a grander level, there are what we call contextual factors. Those contextual factors are endless. I here listed just a few of them: history, social class, gender, culture, technology, religion, environment, media, ethnicity, geography, and so on. And the list can continue on and on. Those contextual factors also can play a major role, whether in shaping the rational dimension, or in shaping the psychobehavior dimensions, or even shaping some forms of intervention and how they take place. And therefore, connecting the essential components of conflict to what's happening in the relationship and what's happening at the contextual factors is what constitutes this model CRC-PABIO. So, and obviously, I think from the color coordination, you can see now that the letter C in red reflects the C for context, R is for the green relationship, and CPABIO, the blue ones, SIP, is the rational dimension, sources, interest, positions. And then the P for brown is for parties. The AB is the attitudes and behavior that are part of the psychobehavior dimension. And finally, the IO are for the interventions and outcomes. That is the abbreviation or the acronym of CRC-PABIO. And this is, of course, a list of defining quickly the specific elements in the model. Of course, I will send this PowerPoint presentation to Professor Abdul Karim, and we'll make it hopefully available to everyone interested. In terms of the specific analysis of what we'll be doing today, I will, of course, the conflict of between what we call now Bangladesh, of course, and Pakistan. Of course, before that, there was East Pakistan, West Pakistan. Before that, there was the Bengali people as part of Greater India, and so on. But where do you draw the line and to do your analysis? I needed to be specific about this because, again, there are many dimensions and dynamics that you must understand to have a full picture of the entire conflict. But because my interest in this presentation is the legacy of Tajuddin Ahmad, especially during the liberation period. And therefore, it makes sense that I am starting from March 25, which again, I appreciate Professor Abdul Karim because he already set the tone for why this is a significant date, March 25, 71. And finishing on March 15, 72, and that's when the Indian military exited Bangladesh and the independence became complete and clear to everyone. So this is the period that we'll be looking at. Yes, we can definitely go back and look at what happened before March 25, 71 and understand. And we must do that, of course, for good historical understanding. We can also look at what happens after March 15, 72. But for the purpose of a focused research and analysis, I will be looking at that period from March 25 to March 1572. And I am sure everyone who is familiar with the Bangladesh situation and that conflict can understand why those two dates are very significant. Having said this, when I apply the model of CRC-PABIO, the comprehensive framework, I will be looking today at 5 elements. I will look at the parties of the conflict, who are they, and the rational dimension for those parties, and the psychobehavioral dimension, and then the relationship influences and the context influences. And then from there, we will get, of course, to talk about the role of Tajuddin Ahmad and the first government. In terms of who are the parties, of course, I always say that when it comes to peace and conflict analysis, things are not clear cut like a mathematical equation. There are different perspectives. People can have different angles looking at things. But this is my humble way of looking at who are the primary parties and who were secondary parties who actively were engaged in that conflict. And in terms of primary parties, I suggest that at one point, it was the Bengali people in the then East Pakistan. The other primary party was the government of Pakistan. And they were obviously influenced by secondary parties who had interest in what's happening at that time. India, definitely, because of region and because of history and because of previous military engagements against Pakistan, were definitely an important secondary party. The Soviet Union and the United States were part of engaged as superpowers in the Cold War, and they were busy worldwide fighting for control and seeking alliances everywhere in the world. And therefore, whatever would happen in the situation of Bangladesh and Pakistan was very important for the Soviet Union and the United States. So we have here primary parties, the Bengali people in East Pakistan and the government of Pakistan, and then the secondary parties as listed here. Now, the primary, what is the rational dimension? When we say rational dimensions, meaning like, what are the specific things that you say, if I achieve that, I will be happy. That's it. That's what I want in a conflict situation. So when we think of the Bengali people's position meaning, what do I insist on achieving, and that's it. And for the Bengali people, again, starting from the date I mentioned, March 15, March 71, March 25, 71, it was independence. By then, things have evolved, things have become so complex, and now the demand, the position of the Bengali people is independence from Pakistan. While the Pakistani government's position was to continue to preserve the unity of Pakistan. And here I would like to say something about conflict analysis. One of the biggest mistakes that happen when we look at different conflicts and try to analyze them is to create an image of one side is the good guy, one side is the bad guy. I agree that the behavior eventually can lead to seeing one side as the villain, as abusive, as oppressor, which happened in the case of this analysis, as you're going to see. But at one point, and even when people are using very violent measures, they are convinced that they are the right ones. I have a very famous motto that all my students know that goes like this: no one wakes up in the morning thinking that he or she is the bad guy in conflict situations. Meaning that if I want to look at a conflict like this or any other conflict, my responsibility as a conflict analyst, as a scholar, is to try to understand how did both sides wake up in the morning thinking they were the right ones or the good guys. So the Bangladeshi people wanted the independence now on March 25th. I'm not saying that before that, probably they had different demands or they were divided in what demands they wanted. But by then, it became independence. For the Pakistani government, they continued to insist on preserving the unity of Pakistan. Those are positions within the rational dimension. The positions usually reflect interests. Interests are more tangible. It's like, what am I going to gain? If you ask the Bengali people, why do you want independence? You want independence because it will achieve certain interests for you. And if you ask the Pakistani government, why do you insist on unity? They also have certain interests that they are trying to achieve. So in the case of the Bengali people, why do you want independence? You want independence because it will give you what you consider to be self-determination, which you suffered so much from for several years or since the Pakistan was formed. And you realize that your ability to self-determine or to have control over on your own fate was taken away from you. And then you wanted to have fair access to resources, political and economic and otherwise, because it seems that under the united Pakistan, it didn't seem that people in the Bengal felt that they were having the fair access to resources such as others from West Pakistan were getting. In addition, they needed to assert elements of their identity that they felt that was being overshadowed or actually sidelined by that united Pakistan. And of course, you have this very famous example of the rising against the issue for language, which the United Nations commemorated later with the International Day of Language, because what Bangladeshis felt that was a threat to their ability to exercise their own cultural heritage, including their Bengali Bangla language. Now, in terms of analyzing conflicts, it's important for me not only to understand what are the positions of different parties, but to also understand the interests, as I just mentioned, but to go deeper and say, what are the sources of the conflict here? And usually sources of conflict in my model are divided into three categories: the category of values and beliefs, the category of basic human needs, and the category of identity. And if I take them together in the case of the Bengali people, then I will say that the sources of conflict for them was the question of identity, and they felt that their identity as Bengalis was compromised or threatened or not satisfied, to say the least. They felt a sense of injustice as a basic human need, and equality. Justice and equality are basic human needs. Basic human needs are not only material, they are non-material as well. And as a matter of fact, non-material needs can be more significant to people in conflict than material needs. In terms of the theories we use in peace and conflict studies, we have several important theories: basic human needs and especially relative deprivation. And I believe that the theory of relative deprivation, as written by Ted Gore, is a great, has a perfect implication here of how the identity issues and justice and equality in the context of the Pakistan created this sense of relative deprivation. And I will come back later to this point when I talk about the contextual factors and the role of religion. When I look at the Pakistan government's position, they wanted to preserve the unity of Pakistan. And I always try hard to understand why was that so important for them. And if I take the principle of no one wakes up in the morning thinking that they are the bad person, then they actually wanted to maintain a strong security position towards India. They just had a war with India in '65, and the situation is very tense over Kashmir and other places. And therefore, if I were the government of Pakistan at that time, I'll be very worried that if the united Pakistan is divided, then that will weaken their position vis-a-vis that major regional enemy, India. Also, they believe that they were the guardians of Islam and that they are guarding the Muslim unity. And the last thing they wanted to see is that the Muslim unity is being divided and broken. After working so hard at one point, whether for good or bad, to create what they consider to be the safe haven for Muslims versus if they stayed within a one India. What are the sources of conflict for them? Definitely the issue of identity, but here's the identity in terms of religion, in terms of Islam. As opposed to when I think of the Bangladeshis, the identity issue was more related to, of course, the identity as in Bengali people. But here it was the identity as Muslims that was in the heart of their claims to why they are the right ones. And also, of course, the basic need for security and feeling that they will be threatened if they were to divide and not to have this united front, especially facing India from the east and from the west. This is the rational dimension, meaning that on a very rational level, this is how the two sides have opposing interests and positions, and they cannot reconcile them. And that's what starts to set the stage for conflict. And then when people get stuck and they are unable to move forward, then they move to developing attitudes and feelings and perceptions about the other. And those attitudes and feelings and perception are translated into behavior. Looking at what happened, and again, I will remind, and maybe I'll keep reminding, I am looking from March 25 to 71 to March 1572. I am not looking in this analysis in the early era before or the era after. So during this one period of time, Bengali people, having exhausted all the processes, democratic processes, as Professor Abdul Karim mentioned, and they found that they were in a situation that is unfair, they had a strong feeling of injustice. We did everything to try to be to be citizens of a state that claims to have a fair opportunities for everyone. We played by democratic rules. We won the elections, and we were deprived of forming the government, and it even got worse. That's definitely sufficient to make you feel that there is injustice inflicted on you, let alone, of course, everything that happened in the previous years since 47. For the Pakistan government, from a psychological point of view, I believe that they had a strong attitude of they are the righteous ones as Muslims, and that they are entitled to be the guardians of Islam. And that seemed to be the strongest attitude that was motivating them in how they were dealing with the situation. What behaviors translated out of the feeling of injustice for the Bengali people, and what behaviors translated out of the attitude of righteousness and entitlement for the Bengali people at that point, again, from March 25, 71, there was a declaration of independence that happened immediately during that time. And I don't want to get into the story and the different point of views about it, who exactly said it, who didn't. That's maybe we'll address this in the paper that we'll write. But the interest is just to acknowledge that there was a declaration of independence, meaning like if I were the Bengali people, I said I had it, that's it, enough. And any other options are not on the table anymore. We want independence. And then they formed the first government in exile. And the freedom fighters started to fight using guerrilla tactics, the Mukti Bahinis. And then, of course, there was an expansion of the battlefield beyond the military grounds. And I will come to this point more when I talk about the role of Tajuddin Ahmad and his government, in how they expanded the battlefield, not only to fight with Mukti Bahinis against the stronger military force of Pakistan, but they also created new battlefields that are not military. This was the behavior that we can see happen during that period. From the Pakistani side, very important for them is that they fueled the anti-Islam propaganda. What does this mean? It means that they continually insisted that those separatists, as they call them, in East Pakistan, are ones who are enemies of Islam. And that was so important for them, not only to actually motivate their own soldiers to commit atrocities, as we have seen, but also to leverage the support of the Muslim world. Saudi Arabia and the other Arab countries and Muslim countries, if they feel that there is a group that is fighting within the one country, Muslim country, against Islam, then that will alienate them and will make the rest of the Muslim world feel that they are actually enemies of Islam. And that were apparently was the strongest message that they were using to motivate their soldiers and to garner international support from the Muslim world. Of course, they arrested Banjubando Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, and they declared emergency law, started Operation Searchlight. Massive massacres took place. Rape was used as a weapon, and all happening in the name of we are the righteous one who are defending Islam. If I think of, okay, so as I mentioned before, if I want to understand the conflict, it's not enough for me to understand only what is happening, the details. What are the interests, what are the positions, the rational dimension, the psycho-behavioral dimension. Those are very important, but I also need to know what influences them. So looking at the contextual factors, the religion, and I mentioned the notion of relative deprivation, And let me connect this religion and relative deprivation to the notion of bond based on religion in the relationship. As Muslims, we all know very well that we all have this nostalgic way of looking at our history as Muslims. We all share this sense of once upon a time, Islam was wonderful. The early era of Islam was full of justice, full of equality, full of fair treatment of everyone and access to resources to everyone, especially the needy one in society. We have stories after stories and narratives after narratives that are confirming to us that that was the story of true Islam. And that was evidently true because at that time, the Muslim civilization and empire expanded so fast all the way to reach India on one side and to reach Spain on the other side, and with a lot of success, whether militarily or civilizationally. And therefore, all of us are driven by that sense that if I am under Islamic rule, then everything will be great and everything will be just and fair. And that was, interestingly, the bond that connected the two Pakistans to start with. Because as we know, that what happened in 47 is Muslims feeling that, no, I'm not going to be treated equally as a citizen under a greater India. I need to have my own state separately. So the two sides, East and West Pakistan, felt that the bond of religion is sufficient for us to form that government, that country called Pakistan. And taking that nostalgic view I mentioned about how under Islam we will live in justice and peace and a fair access and distribution of resources, there was a risen expectation among everyone, including people in East Pakistan. And that's where relative deprivation hits him. When you are entering this new relationship based on Islam with the other side of, across the other side of India, and forming a new nation state called Pakistan, East and West, and you think you're going to now be treated fairly, justly, because thank God you are not under the Hindu control anymore. It's now brotherhood and sisterhood in Islam. And then you realize that, wait a minute, I am worse off now. I am mistreated. I don't have access to the same resources. I'm not even allowed to form a government even after I played by democratic rules. When this happens, the disappointment that happens to you is the foundation of what we call relative deprivation as a theory to explain why people rebel and start to become upset with a situation. And I find that understanding that dynamic of the contextual factor of religion and the bond that was the foundation of forming Pakistan can explain to us the sense of relative deprivation that led to the frustration of people in East Pakistan and their demand eventually for independence. Ethnicity, of course, played a big role. I mean, as evident, we know that the ethnic formation of the Bengali people is very different from the ethnic formation of West Pakistan. And it looks like those in charge in West Pakistan never really comprehended this. They could only look at people in East Pakistan from one angle, which is you are Muslims like us, and everything else must be wiped. And that was important. And that's where culture comes into play, is because culturally, people from East Pakistan had different norms, different history as well. And that didn't seem to be addressed sufficiently or equally in this united Pakistan that is based on one element of identity, which is religion. Geography, I'll come back to it later, because I am sure that also when you look at the situation of East and West Pakistan and how they were separated by the entire India. By the way, when I teach this to my students in different places in the world, when I tell them that there was once upon a time an East Pakistan and West Pakistan, I trick them into thinking first that those two, East and West Pakistan, were actually close to each other and they had shared the border. I give examples of East and West Germany, examples of North and South Korea, And then I say, so where do you think East Pakistan was? And people think that it must have been just adjacent to what is now Pakistan. And then they are shocked to realize that actually it was on the whole other side of the subcontinent. And that will set a foundation later to know how the conflict got de-escalated fairly quickly. Cold War, it was really the elephant in the living room, as we say. It was in influencing everything. You have two superpowers, two very busy at that time, fighting for control of as much of the world and with different ideologies. And definitely that was shedding light on what was happening in the situation. Pakistan traditionally and continued to be under within the realm of the United States. India at that time was closer to the Soviet Union and the socialist camp. And so naturally, anything that's happening in that part of the world would be influenced by those dynamics. Media was used, and I'll come back to that later when I talk about the role of Tajuddin and the government. And then gender, as I already hinted to, was sadly used as a weapon of war. And the level of rape that happened to women and abuse during that war of 71 was horrific. And confirmed what we have seen in many conflicts in the world, where gender is being used as a tool to intimidate and to humiliate the other side. Through it all, back to the relationship factors, I will say that the power asymmetry was very obvious in that conflict. You have the army mainly under control of West Pakistan. It is a complete organized army of a nation state. And it is now fighting a war against civilians and against what they believe separatists, and driven and fueled, as I mentioned earlier, by a sense of we are the good Muslims fighting against those who are threatening the unity of Islam, and they are enemies of Islam. And you can imagine what this would do to an average simple soldier who is fighting, thinking that I'm fighting against those evil people who are threatening our unity. And so this power asymmetry was a big part of it. Is Mukti Bahinis could do just a certain amount of resistance, but obviously how much they can do against such a massive army had its own limitations. And again, we'll revisit this point later. So based on all this, we look at, okay, so March 25, 26, in the next few days, the government is formed with Tajuddin Ahmad, the prime minister, and they are operating from exile. Analyzing and doing some literature review on what they did and trying to frame things within this model of conflict analysis, I found it very interesting that what Tajuddin Ahmad and his companions did was to, number one, declare what outcomes they wanted to achieve. They were very clear based on everything that happened and transpired. And at the moment when Mujibur Rahman was arrested, that what we want now is a sovereign independence. It's no longer about trying to find a middle way of agreeing. Let us just have some type of autonomy, self-rule, whatever it is, under the United Pakistan. That option was now taken out of the table. And now the outcome that Tajuddin Ahmad and his companions insisted on was, we're going to form an independent sovereign state called Bangladesh. And it's interesting that once they set up this outcome, then they started to work backward, meaning based on that, if that's what I want to achieve, then how do I strategize in order to achieve this goal? I think that was really the brilliance here of Tajuddin Ahmad and his companions, is by being very clear on what they want to achieve. But then they know very well that in order to achieve this, it is not going to be an easy task. You are talking here about how to navigate a complex situation where you have a powerful enemy fighting you brutally, using their military force and power. In order to do this, and that's where the lessons can come into how to deal with a powerful enemy. If you fight a powerful enemy that is more powerful than you militarily, and insist on fighting them on military grounds, you will lose, because you don't have the ability to fight them. You may irritate them here and there by some act of guerrilla warfare, but how far can this go? Probably it's not going to achieve much on the ground. Therefore, one key element of fighting a brutal, militarily powerful, more powerful enemy is to take them to a different battleground, not to keep them only in the military one. And that's what I think that when I did my readings about what Tajuddin Ahmad and his colleagues did, is that they quickly acknowledged that if we keep fighting only on the ground, we don't have the capacity. What we need to do is to expand the battleground beyond the military field. And this is where they started to do very deliberate efforts. And that was part of also the research I was doing in the last few days, is how deliberate was Tajuddin Ahmad and his colleagues in raising awareness, for example, worldwide about the atrocities that were happening on the ground. And the second was, how did they use the roving ambassadors to raise awareness among governments and officials in the international arena about what is happening? I have a feeling, and that's why I'll be digging more into this point, is that they learned so much from what was just happening at that time in Vietnam. Vietnam was not far away. It was, the whole world was looking at Vietnam in the 1960s, into the 70s. Vietnam caught people's attention when the media started to play a role in highlighting the atrocities committed in Vietnam. And what did this do? This actually created fracture in the American society before anywhere else. And people started to demonstrate in America, saying, not in my name. I don't want to see my army and my government fighting another people because what we're doing is wrong. And maybe the very famous example of somebody who rebelled against the war in Vietnam was the famous boxer Muhammad Ali, may God bless his soul. And he has a beautiful, powerful statement about how he refused to go and fight in Vietnam against people who did nothing to him. And he was willing to sacrifice his title and go to prison and not to go fight an unjust war. That shows you the power of using media and how you can get the other side even to start to be shaken, or to start to shake the international community so that they put pressure on that powerful enemy that you are fighting. The same happened in this case. In one of the elements in the literature that I saw, there is a clear statement made between Tajuddin Ahmad and some of his companions about we need to activate what they called it at the time, the war propaganda, meaning we need to make sure that the media is used as a contextual factor. And we need to make people understand that we are the ones who are right here. We need to get more people to understand that the Pakistani army and what they're doing are not the good one in such a conflict. And they were very successful actually in doing this, as evident. And again, similar to Vietnam, I think one of the things we saw was the Vietnam War. And as more Americans started to realize the injustice of that war and the brutality, is the musicians and artists started to sing about it and talk about the Americans who are dying there and how unjust that war was. And movies start to come out also to illustrate the point. Equally, we see that what happened quickly is that George Harris, the very famous Beatles member at that time, came out with that famous song, Bangladesh, which I have to say, I was like, I was about 14 years old at that time in Egypt. And I heard the song Bangladesh, Bangladesh. Somebody far away in the world, I started to hear something called Bangladesh, thanks to George Harris. And thanks to what Tajuddin Ahmad and his companions acknowledged, that this is our way of balancing the power with a powerful enemy, is to start to put this pressure from media and from the international arena. The name Bangladesh was not known to any of us, say in the Middle East, but we started to receive in the newspapers images that were horrific of what was happening in that part of the world. And we were confused. I have to say that most of us didn't really know exactly who was fighting who. But the images were horrific, atrocities committed. And those who became more aware started to understand that definitely one side is brutally killing civilians and causing so much damage. So I will say that the expanding the battleground to the international level and not to just only fight with the Mukti Bahinis, which was doing its own part, but definitely the stronger, more effective was happening outside of the military battlefield. And that's with the raising of this awareness, using of the media. I am arguing, and that's why I have it italicized, learning from the Vietnam experience with a question mark. I need to investigate this point further and to see how much, because the timeline is so close. What was happening in 70, 71 was so close to what was happening in Vietnam and continuing to happen at that time. How much there were lessons learned here. And then the role of roving ambassadors was critical and was, again, very deliberate, sending several ambassadors worldwide to influence and to convince international organizations and nation states about what is happening in Bangladesh. And obviously, it was very successful, as evident from Kennedy coming to visit and to check the humanitarian situation with the refugees and other element dimensions of that conflict. And I'm also like trying to understand. Kennedy will not just get up on an airplane and go to a place in East Pakistan or Bangladesh, and unless somebody triggered this for him. And that trigger must have happened within this concerted effort that Tajuddin Ahmad and his companions were doing, which got somebody like Kennedy, responsible for the Refugees Committee in the Congress, to come and look at this issue and then to go back to his government and say, we cannot continue to be supporting such a regime, the Pakistani regime. And that will lead us to actually the next point, which is how they, I will maybe jump to this one, that they manage the secondary parties in a very clever way. By getting Kennedy to go back to his government and say, we cannot continue to support an unjust regime that is committing atrocities, they issued an embargo on certain weapons to be sent to Pakistan. They started to find themselves in a position where they are being neutralized in the middle of Cold War. And that's very important. If I were somebody responsible in the government of the US at that time, I am more busy to make sure the Soviet Union doesn't get more ground or to have more influence. Neither India, who is kind of aligned with the Soviet Union. So how do I succeed as Bangladesh first government in getting the US to actually compromise on its own national interest of an ideological interest of taking over more parts of the world, and to realize that this is going against their values? Just yesterday, I was hearing somebody on the TV here in the US talking about, when it comes to international relations, you always have to compromise between, or find the balance actually, between values, your values and your interests. And this is really the big balancing game. And I think Tajuddin Ahmad and his companions succeeded in getting the Americans to understand that our values are being compromised here, and we cannot continue to push for our interest to dominate more parts of the world. And that came clear in a discussion with Tajuddin Ahmad, where he was asked from Americans, what should we do? And he said, just do nothing, please. I mean, when I think of that statement, and just don't send arms, don't send weapons, and just stay out of it. I think that talks about the brilliance of what he was aware of, is I must neutralize the United States as the traditional ally of Pakistan. And that seemed to work very well. At the same time, he knew that he needed to get support because he cannot win the war militarily. And he was able to do a lot on in the international arena and to show the case of the atrocities committed. But how can I stop the violence committed against my own people? Because this has to stop. You cannot just continue forever to fight in the international arena when your people are getting killed and the refugee crisis is getting worse and worse by the day. So there was a need for an immediate military intervention to take place. He doesn't have that ability. He needed to rely on other allies who can give him this support. And this is where, again, the brilliance comes in how you convince the Soviet Union and India that it is in your interest, actually, to come and support us in this war and to stop the violence and the atrocities committed against our own people. In other words, you wanted India, as happened, to come with its own military, supported by the Soviet Union, and in the middle of Cold War, with the Seventh Fleet hovering around the area. And they will go in and they will secure the surrender of the military, the Pakistani military, and without the US actually moving one ship any closer. That balancing act was so unique and definitely worth of exploring and studying more to understand how did Tajuddin Ahmad and his cabinet succeeded in the middle of Cold War to get one superpower and its regional ally, India, to come into this situation without actually infuriating the other superpower and creating havoc like we have seen in other places in the world. That required that the military intervention by India must happen in a very measured way. And the evidence shows that Tajuddin Ahmad and his colleagues were very aware in discussing with India that military intervention, that number one, it has to be jointly done with the Bangladeshi government. Second, that they will be withdrawing or exiting when the government of Bangladesh asks him to do so. And we'll see later that that's actually what happened. So for me, that balancing act and this ability to neutralize the US and to garner the support of India and the Soviet Union was very critical in managing the party of the conflict. How you bring the secondary party that you wanted to come closer and to get engaged and become a primary party to come in, like happened with India. And how do I push the other secondary party who will be actually working against my interest, here in this case, the United States. That was not an easy act, balancing act at all. Also, there is another important dimension of bringing India on board. In order for India to come in, Indira Gandhi and the Congress were, as in any democracy, concerned about their next election. And they rely heavily on the Muslim vote. And the, big vote, many Muslims live there, and they account for the vote that Indira Gandhi would hope to get in the elections. They were afraid of what I mentioned before of the propaganda of anti-Islam, that those guys are separatists, they are fighting Islam, and that can cause problems with the Indian Muslims who will feel that, oh, those are enemies of Islam, and if the Congress and Indira Gandhi is supporting them, then we are not going to vote for Indira Gandhi and her Congress in the next election. So the Tajuddin Ahmad and his companions made concerted effort to reach out to the Indian Muslim leadership and to make them understand that this is not a fight against Islam. This is a fight actually for Islam, because we are protecting our dignity and our rights for justice and so on. And that was actually another yet a brilliant balancing act to neutralize again, or to actually turn that Indian Muslim community not to be on the side of Pakistan and to disrupt the plan to bring India to stop the violence militarily. And instead, they would actually accept that this was the right move. Understanding what happened here in managing secondary parties, and as I explained, it is worthy of more and more research. And I think in the heart of it was how to get this anti-Islam message out of the picture. And as you can see, that a lot of effort was made, especially with the Indian Muslims and in other circles, to make sure that it is not true that we are enemies of Islam. It is amazing, I have to tell you, that until today, some people frame this conflict as a Hindu-Muslim conflict. I was one time actually doing work on training on peace building for imams and in Africa and different places. And my colleagues in the organization I was working with have already produced a training manual on peace building and Islam and so on. And to my surprise, they wanted to use some case studies. And I was shocked to see that the way they used apparently some existing literature about the conflict of 71, they say that, oh, the Hindus had an uprising against the Muslim government of Pakistan, and they, with the help of India, I mean, they just give this whole story. I was shocked that in the 2007 or 8, when I did this, that somebody is writing such information. It shows you how powerful that anti-Islam message and propaganda was, to the point that in some literature until today, it still exists. But obviously what Tajuddin Ahmad at the time and his companions did was to make sure that that message wouldn't continue to influence the key parties that may actually create problem for them. And as I mentioned, especially for the Indian Muslim community. So between balancing the power and by moving the battle outside of the military, or in addition to the military battleground, to go into the media and international battleground, that was one important approach that was taken. Second was to counter the anti-Islam message. Third was to manage the secondary parties carefully in the middle of Cold War in order to achieve the following outcomes. What we know happened eventually by December 71 is the surrender of the Pakistan military. And here I mentioned geography as a mitigating contextual factor, which is amazing. That once the Pakistani military withdrew, it had to cross all the way to the other side of India. Ask yourself that question. If Pakistan and Bangladesh shared a border, and now the Pakistani army was defeated, and now the Pakistani army is moving to what is Pakistan. If they had shared the border, do you think that the conflict would have de-escalated so fast like it did thanks to geography and the distance? I have a feeling that if they had shared the border, we would until today have scrimmages and military fightings back and forth. But here, geography, thank God, worked in favor of reducing the conflict significantly and stopping the violence once the military moved very far away. Second, of course, is that the government in exile returned home in December 71. And then Bangabandhu, Sheikh Mujibur Rahman came back in January 72. And then the Indian military exited in 72 as agreed on, all the way with Tajuddin Ahmad and his companions, that when we ask you to leave, you will leave. Because the last thing you wanted was to get rid of a Pakistan control only to become controlled by the military of India. And that happened also very effectively. This is pretty much a story of what I see Tajuddin Ahmad and his companions have done. They succeeded in reaching the outcome that they had laid out to start with. As I said, they had a clear outcome. We want sovereign state and independence. And to do this, they knew that they needed to deal with issues related to the relationship and the power dynamic that they don't have, and how you can shift the power by opening more battlefields that you are more at par with the enemy. They worked on the attitudes and feelings that are fueled by the anti-Islam message and made sure to take this out of the field. And they worked on the parties, understood who were the parties, secondary parties, how do I bring a secondary party in my favor, and how I exclude a secondary party who is working against me. And that all led to those outcomes. You achieved everything you wanted. You got the Pakistani military out, you declared independence, and now you are being recognized by all countries in the world. And at the same time, the Bangabandhu returns, and the Indian military actually leaves, and you are fully sovereign and independent. What are lessons learned for us from how to manage asymmetric conflict? I mean, that happens in many places in the world, on all levels also. We are not always in a situation in conflict where we have equal power. And it's often the case that one side is so powerful, the other one is not. And therefore, from the lessons learned, from what we have seen Tajuddin Ahmad and his companions have done, I come up with those 4 principles of how you would deal with a more powerful enemy. Number 1 is you need to set up realistic yet ambitious outcomes that appeal to your constituencies. I think that there was no way that Tajuddin Ahmad and his companions would have succeeded if what they have set as a goal, which is independence, was not something that the majority of their constituencies bought into. I think they had a good sense and pulse of their own people, and they knew that the goal of independence was what people are yearning for, Therefore, they made sure that this is what we will be working towards, setting up that realistic but ambitious outcome that appeals to your own people, because this is how you can have legitimacy. And that's what they got all the way. Second is to engage the enemy on leveled battlefields, meaning that for some battlefields where you will lose, such as the military, you need to find somebody stronger to come. But if that's not possible, you need to open more battlefields that will put more pressure on the more powerful enemy militarily. And then you got to win the hearts and minds where it matters. And here I mean in the international community, the people in the United States, the Kennedys, George Harrison, those ones who actually can make a difference. You need to win their hearts and minds, and that was done brilliantly, actually. And then finally is to manage the secondary parties. You got to sideline supporters of the enemy and to entangle the interest of your supporters to come to your aid. When India came on board and the Soviet Union, they realized that actually it's in their interest to actually have this connection to Bangladesh. It's important for their regional dynamics and how they would do things. So setting up the realistic, ambitious outcome, engaging the enemy on leveled battlefield, and winning his hearts and minds, and to manage secondary parties. All those are important elements that I believe are lessons learned from this experience that we can learn from what we have seen Tajuddin Ahmad and his companions have done. That will end my presentation. I thank you for listening to me, and I am be happy now to take any comments or questions.
স্যার আনমিউট করেন স্যার হারুন স্যার
sorry?
আনমিউট করে নেন হারুন স্যার
ওকে
ঠিক আছে স্যার
শোনা হচ্ছে
জি স্যার
ওকে First of all, I would like to thank and congratulate our learned speaker, Professor Dr. Amr Abdalla, for his excellent presentation. And it is rather unconventional in this sense that his discipline is peace and conflict studies, and he has developed a model, and he has applied that model in the study of the conflict between Pakistan and former East Pakistan, I mean the land of the Bengalis. And he did not tell us many things about Tajuddin Ahmad and the role of his role and the role of the government led by Tajuddin Ahmad. But in another, if we look it from another angle, then we'll see that he has rather said everything, because the model that he has developed and he has applied in analyzing the situation, and the model speaks itself a lot of things, you know. I thank you again, but your presentation is also very stimulating and to some extent also provocative. And before we go to the audience who are connected by Zoom, as the chair of this session of the event, I have rather a few observations. First, you say the bond between the Bengalis and West Pakistanis was religious. That was the bond. If religion was the bond,
Professor Harun Rashid, if you don't mind, just come close to the microphone. Yes, thank you.
Yeah. Do you hear me now?
Yes,
Am
very
I
good.
audible?
Yes,
Yes, you said the bond between West Pakistanis and Bengalis was religion. That right? And you also said that West Pakistan and East Pakistan or East Bengal divided by more than 1,000 miles of Indian territory. Had West Pakistan been contiguous to Bengal or East Pakistan, think could have been different, right? But the fact is, well, the two wings of Pakistan were being, distanced by more than 1,000 miles of Indian territory. That is the fact, right?
Mhm.
My contention, my point is, if religion is the bond between the West Pakistanis and Bengalis, then how would you look at the move initiated by Hossein Shahid Sohrawardi for United Independent Bengal in the year 1947? And Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, the founding father of Bangladesh, was actively involved in that move. So, from your deliberation on may draw the conclusion that, well, up to 1947, it was fine with the Bengalis, as Islam is our faith, we are Muslim, and West Pakistani, they are also Muslim, so let us have a one state called Pakistan. But if we go back to 1940 Lahore Resolution, it stipulated the establishment of two independent states, one in present Bangladesh and another in West Pakistan. And if you look, you have already mentioned that geographically Pakistan was an absurd country, unprecedented in the world. No second country will be able to cite comparable to the geographical setting of former Pakistan. Then it happened in the course of, withdrawal of British colonial powers from India, and the process of decolonization, and they are very abrupt withdrawal. It happened so, but there was a move for United Independent Bengal, and the identity question you have mentioned, that is ethnicity and identity. That is important. The Bengali Muslims, they got involved in the Pakistan and Muslim League movement. That is true. And without their involvement, there would have been no Pakistan. I made this observation here in Heidelberg, And well, I can also explain if we have time. But why should they get involved in Pakistan and Muslim League movement? It was not because of religious consideration. It was essentially because the Bengali Muslim wanted to get rid of exploitation by the Hindu Jamindars and all. So Pakistan movement, so far as the Bengali Muslims are concerned, it was essentially a political, social, economic movement. They wanted to get rid, they wanted to have social, economic, and political emancipation, right? That's why they got involved in Pakistan movement. Through Pakistan movement, they might have their own state in the eastern zone of India, but that did not happen in 1947, And at the following the establishment of Pakistan, the next day, Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman and others, they got involved in the language movement. If religion was the common bond of the state, then why should we get involved in the language movement the next day, following the establishment of Pakistan? Even we did not wait for 1 year or 6 months or 2 years. We did not wait for any day. Exactly, as a matter of fact, the state of Pakistan came into being with language controversy, Bengali versus non-Bengali. That controversy preceded the establishment of Pakistan, you see. So my submission is that whenever we apply this model or any other model in the study of the conflicting situation between Bengalis and West Pakistanis, we need to go back, go to the root, Otherwise, it will be sometime very misleading. This is my first observation. Second, the international community had general sympathy for the cause of the Bengalis.
Sir,
Why? For the cause of the Bengalis, for the fight of the Bengalis, the international community, media, etc., and the Tajuddin Ahmad and his government mobilized world public opinion in our support. That is true, but we should also keep in mind that there was a general election in 1970, and in that general election, the Awami League swept in that election. Right, it came out with the absolute majority in the 1970 general election. The whole world observed it, that there was election for the first time in Pakistan history. The general election took place in 1970, and Awami League won in that election, but power was not transferred. So all foreign media was in Dhaka at that time, you know, and before the election there was a tidal bore and cyclone in East Pakistan, and foreign media people, they came in Dhaka, and then after that natural calamities, it was followed by the election in 1970, and that was the first election in Pakistan. So there was world media attention and focus on what is going to happen in Pakistan. So the sympathy for the cause of the Bengalis during 1971, the 1970 elections and the Awami League victory, and under the leadership of Banglee played a very vital role. Otherwise, you see, you know what happened to Biafra. Biafra, all the powers got united and crushed that movement. But we had general sympathy because there was an election. We constituted majority, and we won in the election. But you are not transferring power. Rather, you are going for Operation Searchlight and killing our people. So the election played a very important role. That is my second observation. And third observation, you said that, well, Islam or religion is the common bond. But when Allama Iqbal first came out in the year 1930, that, well, in order to resolve the political impasse within India, let there be a Muslim state. But he did not include Bengal or this part of India. Rather, present West Pakistan region, a separate state to be established in that region. Again, Saudi Muhammad Ali in his pamphlet or booklet, Pakistan, in 1933, he did not include Bengal, Pakistan meaning present Pakistan. So the Bengalis and the West Pakistanis, you know, there were sea of difference, not only in every respect, you know, even in respect of religion, we are more inclined to Sufism, Sufi Islam, who is tolerant, moderate, and accommodative, and they are more inclined to Wahhabism. So even in the arena of religion, we are different. My submission is that well, up to 1947, religion was the common band, and knowing it deliberately, we opted for united Pakistan. That I would like to contest, and I beg to differ. So if you want to apply your model that you have developed, I think then how will you fit all these other variants that I have mentioned into your model? So I would rather request you that, and I believe that you will give second thought to it, that, well, how to then put or address all these questions, right? There could have been a independent Bangladesh in 1947. Not in, we had to wait up to 1971 because of historical reason, you know, right? So the state formation under British colonial rule, through that process, this kind of things happen, and finally that was unsettled again in 1971 with the emergence of Bangladesh, right? So the emergence of Bangladesh has a long history dated back beyond 1947. So I would not like to see, or love to see that, well, we had common bond, that is bonding, that is religion, and up to 1947 it was okay. Then things developed in other way because of exploitation. With this comment, I will stop here. That is, even Bengali view of Pakistan was not 1947 Pakistan. I hope you have read Bangabandhu's unfinished memoirs. And I will draw your attention at
The sound, Professor.
22, Bangabandhu's unfinished memoirs, page 22. You will come across, he has categorically stated that our state visions were there would be 3 states, one Pakistan, one India, one another one in present Bangladesh, right? That was their state vision in the Pakistan movement or Muslim League movement. So we did not got involved in the Pakistan movement to establish 1947 Pakistan. A section, yes, a section of Muslim leaders, they are for United Pakistan or the Pakistan state that established in 1947. But another section, progressive section, and who is Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman belong, they had a different view of Pakistan, or they had a different view, state view. These should, all these things should be, kept into our consideration. And I don't know how to apply all these variables into your model.
Very good.
Just this is my feeling, and I am sharing my feeling with you. I think you will give some thought to it with these comments. But again, I might have a different view. Somebody else might have a different view. It doesn't matter. But the way you made your presentation, it is excellent and unconventional, because people will start with the life story and political career of Tajuddin Ahmad, blah, blah, blah. But it did not touch upon anything, right? But you said everything. The brilliant leadership that Tajuddin Ahmad provided during all of leadership, that you have covered without using many pages or many sentences. That is also your brilliance, that you can make such kind of presentation, given your experience, expertise, and that I understand. So I think it is, it is, as I said, it is totally an unconventional deliberation you have made. And it is very, very important, because developing a model, then you apply that model in the study of the conflict between Bengalis and West Pakistanis. It is not that easy, but you did it. And I appreciate like anything, Now I think from this year, I have already spoken a lot of things. I should not speak much, but this is also my area of study and area of focus.
Very good.
I feel rather tempted, Now the floor is open, and if there is any question or observation, that will be most welcome, and Professor Amr Abdalla will respond to it. But how could I say now that one should be very precise and not to take long time? Having said lot of things and a long, deliberation from the chair, it is very difficult for me to tell you to be precise, but I hope you will apply your judgment. Now the floor is open for questions, comments, or observations.
Sir,
Thank you.
Sir, one question came from M. Zulfikar Hussain.
Yes, Mr. M. Zulfikar Hussain, you are most welcome to raise your questions.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Professor Abdalla. That was an astute analysis. I have a couple of related questions. You laid out brilliantly how the first government of Bangladesh, led by Shahid Tajuddin Ahmad, navigated the international politics, and they were able to achieve the outcomes that they had set out for the Bangladesh movement. Bangladesh is among very few nations who managed to win independence. Most of the time, as Professor Harun Rashid also mentioned, that these movements for national liberation are often crushed, even when they enjoy significant international support. So my question is, in your analysis of other successful national liberation movements, like the one we saw in South Sudan or East Timor, do you think they also employed similar framework to achieve their objectives? And on the flip side, we also see the Tibetan movement, the West Sahara movement, the Kashmiris, the Uyghurs, the Palestinians, all these persecuted peoples, they're struggling, but they haven't been able to even come anywhere close to achieving national liberation. So my question, the second part of my question is, what lessons could they learn from the successful example of the Bangladesh movement?
Excellent.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Zulfikar Hossain. Should we take more questions, then he will respond, or he will respond one by one?
Okay.
Any more questions?
Better to take all questions together, then go for
Exactly. I hope, Amr Abdalla, you please take note.
Yes,
The
yes.
question. Yes, next. Furkanuddin Shaheb.
Yes, sir.
Oh, yes, you want to raise question?
Assalamu alaikum and good evening. Thanks to Mr. Speaker for his very nice presentation. Actually, the way he has narrated things and delivered the lecture, it is indeed on the basis of the subjects, conflicts, peace, and legacy, and many other things, though have been covered. I do not know what are the what does it require to narrate other things? I would say the Pakistan government activities. Actually, on this specific subject, if I say conflict comes from untoward activities, unfair activities, unkind activities, and peace comes from kind activities and activities of just activities where there is justice. You know, as a professor from peace and conflict, but we Bengali people were deprived and we were maltreated by Pakistani people for a long time, as we have been maltreated by the colonial British people. And all these were the things from where we people had raised our points that we want independence. And finally, we got our independence. I would not differ, but the point of the difference has been raised very nicely, and it is very nicely narrated by our learned Professor Dr. Harun Rashid. I would not like to go in a different opinion and different point, but I go directly to the point. To the speaker and lecturer of the topic. Honorable speaker, why do you consider select the legacy of our Tajuddin, whom we pay our homage and respect to him for his bright and brilliant activities. He had a lot of contribution for our nation, and you have told all the things. And not only the nation, he convinced our neighboring countries, he convinced the Soviet Russia, he convinced other countries. He had a lot of contribution for us. You had the hints. My question, why the legacy of our leader, Tajuddin, have been related with peace and conflict affairs? This is what I want to know from you. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. The way our great leader Tajuddin Ahmad handled this situation.
Okay, again, Professor, if you can closer to
He
the
left a
microphone.
legacy. He left a legacy. Definitely, he left a legacy to remember, to recall, to recollect, to follow. Any other questions?
Sir, আমি প্রফেসর বারি
Professor Bari, yes.
I fully agree with Professor Harun. What he mentioned, I endorse, and I believe that all the Bengali people believe his comments on what he mentioned. But my question is this: if our learned speaker mentioned the religion, Islam, how the military junta of Pakistan can legalize the 3 lakhs innocent women were raped and 30 lakhs people were killed. They were not fighting for Bangladesh, but they were killed, tortured. How the military junta of Pakistan would legalize this? That is the question. Thank you, sir.
So maybe I can respond to some of those points that were made, and then we can take another round of questions.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. I'll be brief, but I just want to say that, of course, I mean, points of Professor Harun Rashid, very well taken. I think what you offered, in my opinion, Professor Harun Rashid, is not necessarily in any way, actually, a contradiction to anything I said. Actually, I was listening carefully to all the different points you raised about the formation of Bangladesh, the different arguments before about should we be a one state or we part of Pakistan, and all this, the movement, the language movement, and so on. As a matter of fact, I found that what you offered was a deeper look into some of the factors that led to the situation that I was looking at in my analysis. I will remind again that I made it so clear that my analysis is for a very specific time frame, from March 2571 to March 1572. And I put that in one slide, just to make sure that we are in agreement that I am not looking at the complexity of what happened leading to that point. That is beyond the scope of this research. Not to say that's not important, but as you know, all scholars here, when you are doing your research, you need to give it some focus in terms of time is in terms of space, and that's what I wanted to do. So that's why actually everything you said, Professor Harun Rashid, doesn't contradict. The story is so complex. The bond of religion that I mentioned, I also don't see that you said that no, it didn't exist. It existed from a perspective of how the Pakistanis saw it as, oh yeah, I mean, that's how we're going to be one nation. But then, as was speaking later by the colleague who spoke, and he said that sense of deprivation that happened, yes. I mean, and that's what I mentioned, is that there was a sense of deprivation because you have this high expectation when you are in a Muslim unity that you will have equality, justice, and so on, and that didn't happen. So I want to say that the arguments about the complex history leading to the formation of Pakistan 47 was beyond the scope of my research. My focus of my research was the immediate dynamics leading to exploring the legacy of Tajuddin Ahmad and his first government in the period between March 2571 to March 1572. So, but definitely all the points you made, and the good thing is we're recording this so that I will go back and investigate those points, because as I write the academic article, I will need to go and make sure that some of the specifics and some of the complexity that relates to this are taken into consideration in the, but I would say in the background of the paper, because again, I want to keep the focus on the specifics of what was done in that one year. So I hope that just takes care of this. But again, very rich and important points you raised, and it shows the as I mentioned, the complexity of the intersectionality of religion, ethnicity, culture, and all this was part of this. Actually, what led to the problem. I mean, when you mentioned in your last comments about their Islam in Pakistan was different from our Islam, we are more Sufi, more open-minded, and they have more of a Salafi Wahhabi approach. I fully agree with this. I mean, there's no question about it. But when we think about it, why did you end up with an Islam that is Sufi and more open? It's because of, thanks to your culture, your ethnicity, your history. There are so many factors led to this, as opposed to the factors that influences their sense of what is Islam. That's what led eventually to the clash and to the complexity and to realization among the Bengali people that we can no longer be part of this, especially, as you said, when you did elections and you won, they still don't want to give you the right to form the government. That now you realize that, oh, wait a minute, everything you've been telling me that under Islam we have brotherhood and fraternity and we're going to have justice and peace and equality, it's all thrown out of the window. You are left with no choice but to struggle for your independence. And so I will say again, just I don't see any contradiction. To the contrary, I see more elaboration, and but it is beyond the scope of what I'm focused on for this paper. I would love to go, and also just also from a methodological point of view, when I use this framework, the CRC-PABIO, if you notice that I have an element called the outcomes/stages. Outcome, why stages? Stages because often conflicts go through stages, like you mentioned, brother Rajul. At one point before 1930s, there was this, and then this changed to that. So when you analyze a conflict, it's like if you end up with a pile of different analysis, depending whenever the conflict reaches a milestone. And what you suggested is there were several milestones in the relationship between Bengali people and India and the British and Pakistan. But ultimately, it led to what? It led to the 47 formation of what we knew as the two Pakistan, East Pakistan and West Pakistan. But so if I am to embrace your entire discussion into an analysis, then I'll go back and do multiple analysis, each one ending with a stage that the conflict reached, a milestone, and that would lead to changes in the party's dynamics and interests and so on. But all of it will lead eventually to what? To 47, and to what happened in the elections in 1970, and to appreciate again that the ethnicity and culture and all this was not taken into consideration. So again, I thank you so much for this. That was really, really elaborate and gave depth to the points I was making. Yeah, there was a question that the last one about how did as Muslims go and commit atrocities and killing and raping women. That's the point that I highlighted also, is I said that flaming that notion of we are fighting enemies of Islam, separatists who are hurting Islam, that actually gives the fuel to the soldiers and to the military to believe that they were actually fighting enemies of Islam. And it is so sad that with this kind of, and even that should not give justification to people to go and commit rape and commit such atrocities. But war is war, sadly, and we see a lot of atrocities committed during wars. And this was happened at a vicious level, but I believe that it was fueled to a great extent by that kind of justification that they are enemies of Islam, they are ruining the unity of Islam. So we are entitled to use any level of violence against them because of what they are trying to do to threaten Islam. Another very good point was made about examples of other liberation movements. I will say that yes, the story of Bangladesh and the independence of Bangladesh in the middle of Cold War was quite unique. And I think also Professor Harun Rashid mentioned that Biafra couldn't do it; they got crushed. But in the case of Palestinians, continue to struggle until today, and they're getting nowhere. The Bangladesh case is really unique. In the middle of cold, and maybe that's where also I distinguish it for a little bit from the other cases that the colleague mentioned about East Timor and that was another one, that South Sudan. I think South Sudan and East Timor benefited from what we saw happen after the Cold War was over and the collapse of the Soviet Union. It is different dynamic. I mean, Bangladesh. And the brilliance of Tajuddin Ahmad is how can you navigate such a situation without actually triggering the military of the United States to get involved? And I think also probably he and his cabinet benefited from the dynamics of Vietnam. The Americans were very wary then that the last thing they wanted was to get engaged in yet another place. They were suffering so much. They were trying to get out of Vietnam. And it took them 30 years, by the way, to go back and invade another place like they did in Iraq and Afghanistan, and only to pull out of Afghanistan almost in the same way that they did in Vietnam a few years before. But I think if I were a decision maker in the United States, I realize my limitations because of what happened in Vietnam. I don't want to get myself involved again in yet another military campaign. And Tajuddin Ahmad and his companions recognize that. In my opinion, I'll dig more into it to know exactly how this shaped their thinking. But they obviously were brilliant in making sure to exploit that point and make sure to keep the US at par at the same time, at distance, I'm sorry, and at the same time to bring the India supported by the Soviet Union. That was not an easy thing to do, but it's different. Again, I would say that the South Sudan benefited from the Soviet Union no longer existed. So a lot of actually changes happened if you look at it since 1990. But with the collapse of the Soviet Union, I see, especially in Africa, civil war in Ethiopia, and they get rid of the communist regime, a fight in Liberia, a fight in Sierra Leone, because what was happening is the US was quickly reshaping the international system and reshaping small nation states to fit within their own mold. And they no longer have this opponent, the Soviet Union, to fight against. So I think that kind of served as a big factor to consider. And that actually, if anything, just to confirm that what happened by Tajuddin Ahmad and his companions was so unique. And it was not easy to do. I will say that we in Egypt, for example, we had our struggle with Israel. But at one point, we failed miserably in 1967, just 3-4 years before your struggle. We didn't know how to play the game right. And we ended up getting crushed by Israel and the United States. And the Soviet Union stood on the side watching and not really coming to our aid. We did not play the international game properly, and we were not successful in garnering the support to our cause. It happened later after so many years, but at the same time, we did not have sufficient international support, didn't know how to play the media card. But obviously, Tajuddin Ahmad and his companions knew how to do this and learned it, in my opinion, from what happened with Vietnam. I hope I covered almost all the points that were raised, and I see another hand up. So, Ms. Farid
raise their hands.
Who?
Cynthia Farid, sir.
That is the last question.
Hi, good evening. Thank you so much. I learned so much from the talk. I have a question just with regards to this legacy of de-radicalizing dissent, right? So if you look at this long arc of constitutional practices, which the government under Tajuddin Ahmad did very, very well. So, you start from the Lahore Resolution and you sort of move forwards. So there are all these constitutional designs on the table, right? Aiming to achieve peace in so many ways, or aiming to kind of de-radicalize dissent in so many ways. My question is, if you look at the formation of the government itself, there is a great deal of emphasis on legalization. So you have the proclamation, then you have this bureaucracy that's immediately put in place. And I just wanted to know your thoughts on kind of what sort of role kind of having that state apparatus, however elementary at that stage or however nascent at that stage, what role that played. Because if you contrast that with, let's say, an exile government formed by Tibet, for instance, which was also sheltered by India, that was not a success, right? It's still not a success. So I just wanted to kind of get your perspectives on that. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you, Ms. Farid. I have to admit that I have not looked carefully at that dimension. But now you triggered me to actually, when I write the paper, of course, to make sure that people understand, my arrangement with the Asiatic Society is that there will be an academic scholarly paper written around this topic. And I just didn't have the time to complete it before the presentation. So I thought I'll do the presentation, which is now serving very well as a framework or a skeleton for the paper that will be written. But the dimension you're adding is going to be very important for me also to add. But I have to admit at this point, I have not dug into that specific element. But as a former lawyer, I will be very interested in how this was dealt with. And as you said, as opposed to other efforts in other places in the world.
Okay. Thank you, Professor Amr Abdalla. And may I also draw your attention to the fact that the West Pakistani did not consider the Bengalis true Muslims.
Sir, come to the...
No, we didn't hear it, Professor.
The West Pakistani, they did not consider the Bengali Muslims true Muslims.
Yeah.
They right? They say
or saw themselves more like we are the more knowledgeable Muslims. We are the better Muslims.
Hinduized, Sanskritized. So why should they go for orgy of killing in 1971? They thought that, well, they are not killing Muslims, they are half Hindus, right? That was their perception. So, well, there are a lot of fundamental differences between Bengalis and West Pakistanis. And your paradigm period is very short, as you mentioned, and you try to apply your model in the study of the given period. That is well taken, but well, whenever you deal with this kind of situation, it is obvious that you have to go back. You cannot just remain yourself confined within the given time frame. Point is there. Anyway, I must admit that after a long time, at least so far as my position is concerned, that I have listened today a learned lecture by Professor Amr Abdalla, who is very much goes with the ideals and stature of the Asiatic Society of Bangladesh, as if he is presenting his talk at the Asiatic Society of Bangladesh, not in other body or platform or organization in Bangladesh. It is Asiatic Society, and it is very much in commensurate with the ideals and ethos and the stature of the Asiatic Society as a learned body. And you have undoubtedly made a learned deliberation today on a very important topic. And what is the legacy, or what are the legacies of our great leader, Shaykh Tajuddin Ahmad? Though you did not explain in so many words, but you said everything, as I mentioned earlier, that a lot of things are there to learn, and that is the legacy that he has left behind. Well, we appreciate you for giving time And in spite of your busy schedule, you gave time to Asiatic Society in preparing this presentation, developing this model, and finally you delivered your talk. And from Asiatic Society, we are highly obliged to you. We are very grateful to you. And well, you have done much more than our expectation. We are fully very, very happy and well overwhelmed. Well, again, we thank the founders. I'm a member of the Board of Trustees of Shahid Tajuddin Ahmad Memorial Trust Fund. I've been Shimimi is with us, and also yes, other family members, they are also with us, and we thank and appreciate them. And we will invite you again. You know, as a matter of fact, it was my proposal that why we are looking around for some scholar for this lecture. Why not Professor Amr Abdalla? Right now, now I share with you that I propose. And I hope I did the right thing. And I would also like to thank yes, Sharmin Ahmed. He's the what should I say? The name, real navigator is she. You know, she did the job of navigation in establishing this trust fund lecture at Asiatic Society of Bangladesh. And we thank you very much. And finally, I would like to thank all the participants, those who have taken part in the discussions, and those who have not, but they have remained connected with us via online Zoom. And I would like also like to thank Mr. Dr. Abdul Karim, our Secretary of Asiatic Society. He has worked very hard to organize today's event. Thank you, Karim. And I think I have already done your job. I mean, Thanksgiving job. And we have taken a lot of time, and I will have to go to my apartment. I am still in the institute, and I am not today well. I had pain on my tooth, but I have forgotten my pain, you know, because of his deliberation. It was so good that I have already forgotten that I had some problem. So thank you, Amr Abdalla, again, and we'll see you the next time. Not as a scholar, you'll be delivering and we'll be listening. We'll meet as our brother-in-law, right?
Dulabai.
And that will be, right?
Yes, inshallah.
Okay. Thank you. Inshallah.
Repiapas, I wanted to say something. Please unmute and talk. Please, Appa. Unmute. Okay.
No, I wanted to make a short comment that wanted to, as a founder of Tajuddin Ahmad Memorial Trust at Asiatic Society, I'm very indebted to its endeavor towards promoting the various causes, positive causes, among which is one to share the life and works of Tajuddin Ahmad. And I am really this discussion has been very insightful. Thank you, my husband, Dr. Abdalla, and thank you, Dr. Haruna Rashid, for your suggestion to invite my husband. And Professor Abdul Karim, you have really worked very hard, and all those who have worked hard, like from behind the screen. And my heartfelt thanks and gratitude to you all for carrying on this task. It's not very easy, all this coordination, organization, lot of preparation and work. So I'm really personally indebted to all of you. And when I established this trust fund at Asiatic Society, as well as in Dhaka University, where Dr. Harun al-Rashid had really lent his helpful hands with all the suggestions and guiding us through how to establish this trust fund in my father's name. We have this idea that it is not only we are honoring a name, but a legacy and the works that he left behind that our next generation can always be proud of, inspired by. As Dr. Amr had mentioned, it was not easy to navigate the superpowers, and still we committed to the independence and achieve it unconditionally. And today the premise, the foundation that we are standing upon, because of the dedication, the sagacity, that passionate deliberation, coordination in fulfilling this dream of achieving our freedom. So this is what was my intention in establishing this trust fund, that our next generation will be inspired, model after this luminary people. We have Bangabandhu, Tajuddin Ahmad, Sayyid Nazrul Islam. We have to give respect to all. They are all our founding fathers. We salute them. Thank you so much.
Only on point that Amr Abdalla is not today your husband. He's a learned speaker, right? Just learned speaker.
Thank you.
Very good.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, thank you to all of you. Thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you, Repiapa and Professor Abdalla. So now for your kind cooperation and very excellent deliberation. We have a little notice for the next presentation. Zahanara Masjid and Mahabub Alam Trust Fund Lecture 2021. Zahanara Masjid Mahabub Lecture Trust Fund will be held on 29th November at 6:30 p.m. through like this Zoom platform. Dr. A.K.M. Abdul Kalam, Professor, Department of Urban and Regional Planning, Jahangirnagar University, will deliver the lecture on urbanization and the need for urban planning in the future development of Bangladesh, an overview. I will request all participants to attend and enjoy the program, and I should say thanks to all participants to make the program successful. Thank you. Good afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. All the best. Thank you.
Thanks a lot to the Professor Amr Abdalla. Nice job done. Nice job done.
Thank you so much.
Amr Abdalla.
And I will send the PowerPoint presentation to Professor Abdul Karim so he can share with anyone.
Anybody need, I will give them.
Yes, I'll send it to you.
Sir. Okay, thank you. আমি স্যার ওটা পাঠিয়ে দিব আপনাকে, আপনি স্যার একটু ই করে দিন, ঠিক আছে?
পাঠাবো, আমার লেখাপড়ার মধ্যে না, আমি তো আসতেছি, তারপর আসার পর করে দেব। কিছু ফ্যাকচুয়াল প্রবলেম আছে ওখানে।
আমি আজকে পাঠিয়ে দিই, আমাকে এখনই ইমেইলে আপনাকে পাঠিয়ে দিই স্যার।
না, এখন পাঠাবে না, এখন আমি খুব দেখতে পাচ্ছ।
আপনি আসবেন স্যার, কয় তারিখে আসবেন স্যার?
1 তারিখ।
1 তারিখে
আসবো।
ওকে, আমি প্রিন্ট করে রাখবো স্যার, ওটা আপনার সাথে দেখে নিব জি।
ওকে, থ্যাংক ইউ।
Thank you.
দেখা হবে।
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum.
Thanks to everyone.
Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you very
so
much.
much.
Thank you. Keep in touch.
Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you. Send us the link.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Okay, after completion and conversion of this thing, then I will say.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you so
Karim.
much, Professor Abdul Karim.
I will talk you over phone. Thank you. Assalamu
Thank you.
alaikum.
Assalamu
Wa
alaikum.
alaikum assalam.
Now we can close.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.